together. Recording started. So the question is create a music service for kids. I've also I created a doc here for us to take notes, just so that if anybody is interested in seeing the question and some of the notes I'm going to be taking, they can see it there. So the only rule of the house is if you want to share your thoughts, please raise your hand, and I'll do my best to give everybody a chance to share their thoughts, and we'll try to kind of go through that hour together, and hopefully we'll arrive at a good answer. All right, so we're going to jump right in. Mark, I can see you've raised your hand. Go ahead. What would you like to start with?
My first question is clarifying question is what kind of kids, what's the age of the kids?
Got it. That's a very good question. So what's the age range, right? And I think you know, let's say for the sake of the argument, it's 5 to 10, right? Now, one suggestion that I would make is that just so that we would come across a kind of more decisive, right? We would be asking this clarification question in a slightly different way, kind of say, I'm going to assume that it's in the age range of like 5 to 10. Please let me know if you disagree, right? So you kind of, on one side, you give them a chance to like, you know, share their perspective. On the other side, you're kind of showing that, look, you can kind of quickly make decisions and kind of move forward. But that's a really good question. Thank you so much for asking. Anybody else has any other points or anything that they want to share, please raise your hand. It's really a much better learning experience when everybody get involved. Okay, perfect. So I can see that Niraj, you raised your hand first. Go ahead, Niraj.
Yeah, Bijan. So another clarifying question is what kind of music app are we talking about? What is the motive behind this app? Is it a sort of learning, or is it just like a Spotify kind of an app? Basically, if it's an instrument learning app, or it's going to be a Spotify kind of app.
Got it. So let me kind of flip that back to you and say, you know, what would you think? Yeah, and I just want to kind of clarify and say, the question says create a music service for kids, right? So whether or not it's an app, I think that's something that we would kind of decide, but create a music service for kids. So
right.
Yeah, okay, so go ahead. And honestly, you can, you know, make your assumption that you can say, this
Sure.
is what I want to focus on, like, yeah, and explain to me why, and then that's good. Go ahead.
So, I mean, I would assume as kids, they wouldn't be, it would be controlled under their parents, whatever they use, whatever kind of services they use. And I think it would be better if they have a music learning app, not app, or let's say music learning service, rather than listening to music, because that's not probably which they're going to do much. They're probably going to learn the instruments. So I would go in that direction.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. So I'll come back to you in a minute. The one thing that I would also say is we should kind of be careful separating product ideas, right, from kind of high level clarification questions that we're trying to define, right? So you know, it's fine to say, you know, by service, I'm going to assume that I can pick any type of service. You know, maybe I'll just focus in the learning service area, and there's going to be different product ideas. You kind of you want to make sure you're clarifying to the interviewer that this is not a product idea, right? So I'll go to the next person. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask pretty much the same thing. Like, what do we actually mean by service? And then to your points, I was going to kind of frame this as, you know, what do we mean by service? And when I'm thinking about the type of services that we can provide, just like who was just speaking, was that Sridhar? Was just saying, you know, it can be a learning, or it can be more like a streaming platform. When I think of it as, you know, if we were to go the streaming platform route, there are existing solutions that I think would make it somewhat difficult for us to enter into that space. So if we were to go there, we would really want to have a differentiated product. which kind of leads me to believe that it should be some other type of path, like Sridhar was saying. And I also have a question for you, Bijan. At this point, would you say like let's say we just laid out, hey, software streaming is a little bit too impacted right now, so let's not do that. Like, would we make that assumption right now? Or would we kind of say there's a few different services that I think of, here's X, Y, and Z, and we'll pare them down as we go through the case? Or would we really want to just hone them down right now?
So I think, first of all, I would say the way you positioned it is really fine, because what you did was you kind of explained to me why from the beginning you don't want to spend time going down a path of trying to build a service in a saturated market or in a busy market, right? So there are a lot of product ideas that could exist in the learning category. There are a lot of products that could also exist in the streaming category. But you explained why you kind of want to stay away from streaming and you're thinking about focusing more into this other area of learning. And you're still narrowing down the scope of the question, in my opinion. So that's totally fine. I think the way you did it, especially because you explained to me why you're more excited about going down that path, that seems reasonable to me. And to me, it's giving me a hint that you're the kind of PM that pays attention to the dynamics of the market and is looking for areas where there's still opportunities for somebody to come in and kind of become the winner of that market, right? So that's I would say a kind of a plus in the way you answered it. Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, so I have two quick things. The first is a clarifying point on the first question that was asked. Since the question posed was create a music service for kids, the way I would have asked that question is, do we have an age range for the kids, and like how are we defining kid? And are we building something for parents to use for kids or for the kids to use themselves? Is that an appropriate way to ask that question? Without too much getting into like the user groups early on?
So I think it's okay to ask. One thing I would do is I would try to be a little bit more kind of like show signs of being decisive and say, I'm just going to assume that in this case, we're going to be building for, kids that are going to be using it. And I understand there are probably going to be other user groups that are going to be involved in this, because kids cannot be the sole users and customers of a music product. But let me know if you disagree, right? You're kind of giving them a space. You're kind of like leading the direction. You're probably leading it in a way that benefits you, right? So it's totally fine to do that. And it's a very reasonable question. So I'm fine if you ask me, like, can I assume that I'm building for kids or the parents? Totally fine question. But I think you'll get some extra points when you show that decisiveness and kind of say, I'm going to go build for kids while being aware of the other user groups.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Did you want to add anything?
Well, I was just going to say that if I was asked this question, I would also probably ask if I am like a PM at a larger company and there are any like large strategic goals that we should be aware of outside of the scope of just this project, because that might impact how we want to focus and who we want to focus on.
Yeah, so I would assume that for the sake of the argument that this is a new company, right?
Cool.
So let's keep it simple. So this way we have more options, but that's a totally reasonable question. Is it a startup or an existing kind of ecosystem that it's going to be part of? Let's assume that it's a startup because it's going to give us more room to play. Go ahead, Obioha.
Yeah, excuse me if I'm being redundant, but I think the way, just for our record, I think that the way I would go about that question of, the users is we're building with keeping in mind that our customers are parents, because the value proposition for a streaming service for parents is almost like close to zero, given that there's so many options. Whereas if it's a learning platform, then they're enticed to buy that for their children. Whereas I don't feel like parents would really want to buy a streaming platform for their children. So that would definitely have to be a clear focus for us, keeping in mind that the parents are the customers and the children are users, and parents may be using it with their children as well.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. Now, I would say that ideally you want to start out with kind of coming to an agreement on the scope of the project, right? On the scope of the kind of interview question really quickly. And then after that, you can kind of talk a little bit about the role of parents versus kids. So it's a very valid point. I agree with you. Having said that, I would ask that now, since like we're kind of almost phasing out of the clarification question. So thanks so much for highlighting that. And given that we have, about an hour, we want to kind of power through the whole question. I'm going to move on to the next phase. We've asked some clarification questions. We kind of narrowed down the scope a little bit. We talked about we're going to build for kids. We're going to focus on kind of a music learning app, and it's a startup. So these are some really good, clarification questions that we came up with. It's really narrowed down the scope. Now, what do we do next? Like, what's the next thing after kind of getting an idea on the clarification questions? Like, what do we want to do next? Lil, would you be interested in answering that?
Yeah, sure. So the next phase, I believe, let's define like a business goal. And so I was gonna add on to the narrowing down the scope part, where I think 5 to 10 ages, kids of that age doesn't have their own phone, and so like in terms of platform, I would probably choose like an iPad or pad, or like I would add on to the clarifying question, like as of, can we also incorporate hardware? Like, can we develop our own hardware, like a music playing hardware type of thing? Yeah, so I mean, the next phase would be defining a business goal here.
Got it. So I'm going to quickly answer, say, this would be kind of the last clarification part, and the answer would be, up to you. If you want to use hardware, go ahead. If not, no. But, I'm curious to know, for a startup, I think, you could say, yeah, I want to build a hardware, because there are hardware startups that come around. So that's totally fine. It's up to you. But let's move on. So the next thing we want to do is maybe you said you wanted to talk a little bit about business goals. So what are some things that you would want to kind of discuss here?
So my original thought would be, since we are a startup and this is like a completely new product, the goal here would be for more people to adopt, like the adoption part.
Got it. And I think, one thing I would highlight is, if you notice, it's kind of hard to come up with a goal for a product design question, right? And the reason for it is we haven't built anything yet. We don't even know what problem we're going to solve or what kind of product we're going to be building. So I think this is kind of where product design and product improvement questions are a little bit different, right? In product improvement, you have an existing product and you're kind of thinking about, okay, that's my objective for the next 6 months or a year or two, and therefore I'm going to focus on these areas. Whereas in product design, a goal might not be necessary. You can kind of say, okay, out of all these problems that exist in the world, right? Out of all these different people that I could be serving that represent different pain points, who do I want to serve and why, right? And that's kind of really how, a business or a startup gets started, right? They start out with getting passionate about a particular user group's set of problems, right? So it's kind of interesting to kind of pay attention to the nuances between product design and product improvement question. All right, with that said, I'm going to continue. Who's interested in kind of guiding me into what the next step should be? I think we kind of said maybe business goal, not so necessary at this point because it's a product design question. What do we want to do next? Go ahead, Obiaha. Please let me know if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
That's actually perfect. You can call me Obi if that works better. But I think next we want to think about who our users are and get our user groups.
Sounds good. That makes sense. Go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Okay. I think that first we should list the users. So I think first, parents. our users as well as customers, schools, children, playing on their own iPad autonomously. And then possibly also, if we're getting more specific, children who are trying to learn music. Maybe in school, maybe at home, but people who are trying to learn and not just enjoy.
Got it. So people, kids children that are trying to learn music. Okay.
And I guess we could, sorry, I was thinking like, if we say people who are trying to learn, we can say people who are trying to learn things through music and people who are trying to learn music. Those could be like two subgroups under people who are trying to learn.
That's a very interesting point you brought up. Really interesting point, because you're kind of saying that there are different user groups that could exist, right? Within the children audience that we're going to target, or the children market. Some are using music to learn other things, and some are like just learning music. Okay, that's fair. That's kind of one way of segmenting the users, and I'm going to kind of write it in that way and say trying to learn music. And then another one is trying to really learn different things with music, right? Via music. Basically, music is more like a tool in that case. All right, sounds good. I'm curious to know if anybody else has any more views on the user grouping side. Like, what are some of the other things that we can kind of talk about? I noticed, I think, actually, Niraj and Alex haven't said much yet. So I'm going to go to Niraj first, and then Alex, and then I'll come to Mark, just so that I'll give everybody a chance to speak. Go ahead, Niraj.
Sure, Bijan. So regarding the users, I think since it's a learning app, it might be something which a child or parents are learning via the, let's say automatic via system itself, or there might be a person or at the other end, more like a mentor or a tutor. So I would mention, if we decide that that's going to be one of the options, so a mentor would be another user.
Got it. So it's like kind of mentors or like teachers is basically what you refer to, right? Another user group. Okay,
yes.
That's fair. All right, cool. So anything else do we want to kind of talk about, at least around the children's side? Alex, do you want to go next? And then I'll come to you, Mark, afterwards.
Yeah, happy to hop on it, but it seemed like Mark really wanted to go too. The only thing that I was going to say is that the segmentation that I was thinking of, and this is basically just reiterating everything, things that everybody have already said, but framed a little bit differently, is I would segment according to the end user, who would be like parents, kids, mentor, the for-profit companies, which might be advertisers who might want to go through the app, and then also not-for-profit companies or other partners. And somebody said schools, something like that. So I would kind of put those as the three largest categories, and then maybe drill down from there. And I was thinking, end user probably want to focus on initially, but I just wanted to kind of bucket things in terms of end user, for-profit, not-for-profit, but really drill down into the end user, specifically the kids, mentor, and parents, and then kind of investigate amongst there. That's kind of how I was.
Got it. Yeah, sounds good. And that was kind of one thing that I wanted to really get us to say is, okay, what are we going to focus on, right? So I'm glad that you kind of like helped us move to the next phase of, okay, we're going to focus on the user side, right? And we can even get like more specific than that and say, I'm just going to focus on the kids interface side for this particular product, given that we have limited time, right? And then kind of move on and say, like, because to me, parent control and everything else, it's pretty easy. Like, we can figure it out. There are many other examples. The tricky part is getting engagement from kids, right? So that's why I'm going to focus on getting kids engaged, right? That was kind of my my thing. So I'm glad you said that. Perfect. So we've decided that we're going to focus on children, right? And I don't see Mark's hand raised anymore. Curious to know, Mark, did you still want to share your thoughts on this, or I think Max already is.
Yes, like in terms of user groups, parents are really important because let's say they can navigate the kids their learning process, and they definitely want to select what kind of music they are listening, and they want to guide the process, and they want to make sure, let's say there are some cultural specifics, let's say they want to learn more, I don't know, like Spanish, Jewish, Indian culture, or some kind of cultural context, or some specific just specific music. So they could be, just more focusing on poetry or something like this. So some specific learning approach. And in the end, parents are really paying for this whole app. So they are really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for that. And I think straight, you're right. Also, another user group is content creators. Okay, great. So we got a bunch of user groups. I think we all agree that, even for like something as simple as like a music service for kids for learning, the different user groups that we have to think about. But for the sake of this like interview, we're going to focus on the kids, the user side of it, and really kind of think about what we could be building there. So we're going to kind of move on to the next phase. What's the next thing that we have to do, right? So now we've decided what the user group is like. What's the next thing that we want to do? Anybody wants to help? Max, I can see your hand is up. Hopefully you'd be answering this.
Yeah, I can try and help. I was gonna ask if we thought that kids was like too vague, given that the prompt itself was music service for kids. We kind of just ended up there. I wanted to get your feedback on that, but if we want to move on, I can just go straight into the next phase.
So you brought up a really good point. If we kind of like spoke a little bit from a user persona perspective at this phase, and we also said there are different type of kids that they want to learn music, right?
Yeah.
They're the serious ones that are very into it. They're the ones that their parents tell them you have to do it. So they're kind of like, being forced, and maybe parents needs to kind of check on them and things like that, right? So they're kind of controlling and monitoring is more important. And then you can think about a couple user groups. That would have been ideal. But I realized we stayed very high level.
Got it.
We kind of went to the next phase. And then I was hoping that during the kind of identifying the pain points associated with the users, we kind of figure out, okay, and say, okay, there's like, there's one group of users that have this big pain point. There's another group that have big points. But you were totally valid, and it would have been perfect to say that, there are different user groups within kids, and you kind of explain what those user groups are, right? Yeah, so that's totally fair. Thanks for asking.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, so the next step that I would go through is I would try to list out like the major pain points for our user group that we've identified. In this case, maybe it's kids. One easy way to do that is to kind of go through like what a user journey might look like for learning music. And we've sort of talked about a lot of different types of education, like people learning things through music, or people learning instruments or things like that. So for the sake of this interview, I would probably choose to focus on one of those, because I think it could get really, really broad really quickly. So I would focus on learning things through music, because I think there's a much bigger market and opportunity for that. And I find it more interesting. So that's how I would go about the next steps. And pause me if you want me to keep going, or stop, or if I should just keep going.
Got it. So I would say let's focus on learning music.
Okay.
Let's focus on learning music. And the reason for that is I think it's closer to a music service for kids. Maybe not, but either way, let's just like focus on like learning music. So
okay.
All right, sounds good. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess like step one would be getting access to this music service for the kid. What that means, we don't really know yet, but they have to get it somehow, whether it's like going to a location or getting access via an app or something like that. So that's sort of like step one in the process. Step two is finding the content that you want. And that could be like a large sort of swath of things. It could be, do I want a lesson from this person for this very specific instrument? Am I a beginner, an intermediate, advanced? There's a whole slew of things that could happen there. And if the service actually ends up being in person or physical, you might actually be doing that before you go to the place. So that might switch the order of operations. Then step 3 might be actually like engaging with the lesson. And then step 4 might be, I guess, completing the lesson and maybe adding a review or feedback to the instructor of the lesson itself. That'd be sort of like, that's sort of how I would go through the user journey. And then I would, once I've written those out on the whiteboard, I would then list out different pain points for those steps.
Got it. Okay. So I think you kind of highlighted a few pain points, and these are like kind of, we talked about the user journey at a very high level. And we talked about like kind of, some of the pain points are like, finding the right teacher, maybe, or like kind of going through this like phase of trying to figure out which teacher is the right fit, finding the right content. I think I could have been, maybe it's my side, but I think I wanted to hear more of like kind of a story around, yes. So one thing you could say, like, okay, it's like learning from music, and say, okay, here's how learning for kids would work, right? The first thing is the kid or the parents need to decide on what musical instrument they're going to be working on, right? And maybe getting access to music is kind of talking a little bit about that, but that's the first thing that they have to do, right? Then the next thing that they have to do is to figure out what's the right kind of learning mechanism for the kid, right? And then they have to figure out the teacher, or maybe the teacher sometime will go before the learning mechanism, right? And then they go through this like kind of ongoing process of like learning, and it takes a bit of a time because every week maybe parents get feedback. So you're kind of telling more of a story, and rather than like, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, you want to kind of really like make the interviewer really think about how the journey could also be flexible, right? Because always people come in, innovate on a product by swapping like basically the parts of the user journey back and forth, right? Somebody would come in and say, I'll guarantee your mortgage before you get a house. Somebody says you get the house and then I want to give you the mortgage. So I think that part is kind of important to highlight by describing the user journey. And then now we need to kind of dig into the pain points. But you're totally right that it's really helpful to talk about the user journey before we talk about the pain points. It actually helps even myself, like when I visualize the journey that people go through, and then I can kind of think about a bunch of pain points that they're going to be dealing with. I want to go to S. Chan as the next person. So S. Chan, already you added a couple points. One was, Zoom fatigue is a real thing, online tool. So I think these are good points. I just want to say, you want to kind of like talk to it from a user perspective, right? And what I mean by that is, maybe the way you would describe it is say, it's hard to get kids in front of a monitor for 1 hour, right? It's not specific to Zoom. It's more about the bigger picture, right? Like it's a bigger pain point. It's a user pain point. Might be something to kind of like keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm curious, Jen, if you're interested in sharing a couple of pain. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify on that, what I was trying to say is that with children having to focus in the day online with tools like Zoom and receiving instruction, they may associate an extracurricular activity such as learning music outside. If it's delivered in that same format, they may have reservations and not be as keen on that. So the mode of delivery becomes critical. And then another pain point is that a 5-year-old's attention span is going to be hugely different from a 10-year-old's. And so whatever solution, has to be able, well, without the benefit of a real live person there who can modulate their instruction or level of instruction, it would be hard to find a one size solution that fits all. So those were the two. And then I guess the third one is that it's just the instrument itself that requires a kind of different approach for, say, if we're looking at something that's delivered online as a music service. So, for instance, learning drums online is harder than learning keys.
Got it. Thanks so much for sharing that. And you brought up a few good points. I agree with you. Kids might be hard to kind of be learning. I think one thing that might be worth kind of highlighting is we're kind of making the assumption that this music service is going to be online, right? I don't think we actually said that clearly to the interviewer. I just want to kind of highlight that and remind ourselves that we're making this assumption, and it's okay. Like we could say during the early phases that I'm going to focus on an online product because that's kind of what I'm interested in. I'm focused in technology, and that's what I'm going to focus on. Is that okay? Right? So that's kind of one thing, because in product ideas phase, we could actually suggest some music services that are not online, right? There are a lot of businesses that are successful that way. Regarding your second point about attention span, that's a really good point. I'm curious to know, Esjan, how would you address that quickly during the interview process? Like, given what you just highlighted, like that's a really good point you brought up, that the way you teach a 5-year-old is very different than the way you teach a 10-year-old. So, how would you address that during the interview?
I think that would be addressed in the solutions phase. Providing that that's the actual problem that you want to solve, the pain point that you want to solve for, providing that you decide that pain point is the one that is most appropriate to your goal, and also is an impactful enough pain point to solve.
Yeah, that's fair. So, okay, sounds good. So we're going to address that in the next phase. Another way you could address it is say, given that I'm realizing there's like a huge range, ideally, we would say it earlier, I'm just going to focus on like a narrower age range. But the way you're doing it is also actually really good, because that gives you more optionality in the product ideas phase. So you can actually think about more ideas more freely and say, I'm just going to pick this particular solution for this particular scenario. All right, sounds good. So I'd like to hear some more pain points. Niraj, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, Bijan. So regarding the kind of content or the kind of learning which a kid wants to do, there are 3 ingression points to that. First 2 are from a parent side, and the third one is from a kid side. From parents' perspective, what they want to teach their kids, first one might be something from their culture itself. They might be in a metro city, they are from a different place, they want their kids to learn their local history or something local to their culture. That is one. Second thing might be when a parent wants to teach their kid a particular instrument, maybe they are interested into it, or anything miscellaneous, right? And the third one is from a kid's perspective, where a kid is interested in a particular instrument, because kids are like that. They might like something randomly and they'll say, I want to learn this, right? So these are 3 ingression points to the kind of instrument a kid wants to learn. And then, as Max also pointed out, that there are different perspectives like engagement, feedback. I would like to add one more, that is tracking the progress of of the kid, right? So first 3 pain points is what kind of content or what kind of instrument to learn. That is one. And then after that, how do I engage with whatever service I'm providing? right? I would like to lean towards more of a online service. So I would say that to engage, a kid should ideally have an option to compare himself, or let's say to have a collaborative environment with others. So that kind of a service might be required. And yeah, and kids should always be able to, a parent should be able to track a kid's progress, whereas it should look like to kid it's in a fun way, but for parent they should have a more statistics available.
Got it. Thanks so much for sharing that. And yes, like I think a couple of things you said pretty important, and like I think one of them is a little bit aligned with like what Lel just posted here, which is kind of lack of interest and incentive to practice, right? And like kids, unless they're like really passionate, which is very rare at that age, right? To be passionate about music, it's just hard to get kids to play music, right? So anybody with kids would know that. So I think that's a very interesting pain point to kind of pay attention to, because it's going to have a lot of impact on the interaction, how we go about it, and all those things, right? So we've got a few. We'd love to get a couple more, actually. Maybe Obi, would love to get your thoughts also, like what other pain points can you think about?
For sure. I think first I want to ask a clarifying question. I just want to know specifically what part of the user journey we decided that we're attacking.
I think for now, to be honest, we are still at kind of like the pain point phase. So you can decide, what pain points are interesting to you. And then after that, we can talk about, okay, we want to focus on these pain points, or you can actually go and talk a little bit about different product ideas that come to your mind. And then we would pick some of them. But you don't have to necessarily say, I'm just going to focus on this like one particular part of the user journey. You can, at this point, you can kind of think about all kinds of ideas, all kinds of pain points that come to your mind. Ideally, you leave that option open, because that's going to make it easier for you to think about ideas, right? Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Okay, so I think one pain point that I'm thinking about is maybe a lot of the times the teachers can't get through to the kids, or the kids are not, receptive to the teaching. They don't like the teacher. They don't want to listen to the teacher. Maybe the kids are getting bored. Yeah, I would say.
So throughout, this is kind of more like, I'm going to kind of say lack of interest to practice, and then I guess lack of interest, lack of attention by the users, by the kids, right? Okay, fair enough. This is really, you're talking about like throughout the session, right?
Yeah.
Throughout, like during kind of learning phases or during learning times, and we can talk more about it in product ideas. I have some thoughts on that, but I'll kind of hold off on sharing them. Okay, so that's another. What other pain points can we think about? Like let's just like kind of think about very high level. Music service for kids, right? We've decided this is kind of a learning tool. What are some of the other problems that kids might have, right? Okay, that's a very good point. This is a very good point that Max brought up, right? Kids have different, preferred learning styles, right? Okay, so we're thinking a little bit. Can we think about a couple more pain points, like high level? Go ahead, Nell.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say is, like, for instance, my kids, when she is playing piano, I don't know if she is playing it right or not. I can't give feedback to her because personally, I don't know. And so, yeah, like the real-time feedback, yes.
So it's like they might be kind of practicing it wrong when they're doing it alone, right? When they're practicing solo. Okay, that's fair. All right, cool. So we've got a few ideas, a few pain points. what do we do next? Like, what's the next thing that we should do that? I'm curious to know. I'm just quickly reading Niraj's comment. Apart from learning the instrument, kids should know a little bit about history associated, maybe visual. Okay, fair enough. But I'm curious to know, at a 5-year-old or like kind of a 10-year-old, I'm curious to know, can we do that? Can we really like get them to, and you know, I have some opinions on this because I have a nephew that is like 7 years old and I can't get him to sit down even for 10 minutes. So yeah.
I think if it would come to the solutions part, I have something in mind. So yeah.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. So if you have something in mind, that would be interesting. Okay, so fair enough. But you know, I think one thing that's important to kind of highlight is I've heard sometimes really crazy ideas, like people really missing the point. Like one question that I've heard actually one of the coaches at our platform, Anand, sometimes asks people is like, design a phone for kids. And people totally miss the fact that these are kids, right? So they come up with all these like crazy ideas about like things that they want to do. And it's important to kind of not miss that. In this particular case, I think it's fine to include it because you kind of explained that you've probably thought about like some ideas. And I just wanted to kind of make sure we always remember these are kids. So we're going to continue. Okay, so we got some pain points. What do we do next? Like, let's move on to the next phase. We're about 15 minutes left to the end of the session. What do we want to do next? Okay, prioritize. So now I think that's totally fine. We can prioritize. One thing I will say is that there are two approaches you could take here, right? One approach is that you just go to the product ideation phase and say, I'm going to see what kind of ideas I can think about, right? Another way could be that you pick a couple pain points, right? And you kind of go deeper on those pain points, right? Either approach is fine. To be honest, I've seen people taking both approaches. It's totally fine to go down either path. So let's go down the prioritization path. Given we have limited time, I'm going to ask you, Lel, if you're interested, in 1 minute, tell me which pain points we're going to prioritize and why.
I want to prioritize the lack of interest and incentive to practice, because based on my experience, like as a parent, you want them to be able to practice on their own and be automate the practice whole thing and keep this rolling, instead of like beating them, or sorry, not beating them, but forcing them to practice. Yeah.
Okay, so definitely no beating. Yes, totally. So lack of interest. I'm laughing at Esjan's comment. Pretty funny. So prioritize pain points. So one is like lack of interest from kids to practice. So can we say that we're going to focus on that? Is that totally fine with everybody? Okay, sounds good. Let's do that. And Lel, yes, we know this was kind of not what you meant. Sounds good. Let's continue. Alex, what do we do next? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it might be good to tie that to, I think this was also Lel's idea in the beginning on like, what are we actually trying to accomplish? And since this is a startup, we want to get more people on board. I think that specifically ties well into that, the lack of attention, like being able to market, hey, we have a solution, or we're providing something for your kids that they'll actually like to work with. I think that'll help bring people on board. So I think it ties well with that goal. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, that's totally fine. And I really like how you guys really describe this situation, right? Like you described why this particular pain point is more meaningful. So that sounds good. Thank you so much for that context. So what do we do next? So we've kind of decided this is the pain point. What's the next step? Anybody wants to help me?
I mean, I think after we decide on the pain point that we want to address, it's now time to start thinking about solutions.
All right, cool. So we'd love to hear some ideas from you, Obi, if you're up for it.
Okay, so if we're thinking about lack of interest / incentive, I think that one solution is to track progress and show the kid or the parents that they are making progress, because progress is a motivator. If they see that they're improving and we can quantify that and like deliver it to them in some way, then they're more likely to stick to it and keep coming back.
Got it. So, there's one thing I would say here, is that, keep in mind the pain point that we decided that we're going to focus on, right? The pain point that we decided we're going to focus on is this issue of like lack of interest from kids to engage, right? So with that in mind, when I think about tracking progress, it's more of a feature to me rather than a product. Right. So you got to try to kind of go one level higher and think like, what's a big product idea that I can think about? So I think somebody, for example, mentioned here, brainstorm solution. One idea would be kind of gamifying it. Okay, sounds good. So that's one idea. I would love to kind of get a little bit more clarity on like what we mean by that. We'll come to you in a second, Lel, but first let me go to Niraj since their hand has been raised for a while. Go ahead, Niraj. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, Bijan. So regarding one of the solutions is how you engage a kid is probably they need a companion, and since I think we are aligning more towards an online solution, their virtual character might help them, a virtual character of their same age. This is also where the history part comes into picture. If it's an instrument of historical significance, the virtual character can be of that ethnicity, just to showcase, just to connect better for the kid to understand the significance of this product, of this instrument. And that virtual let's say virtual character will help the kid throughout their journey, and at different difficulty levels, that same virtual character can also increase their the way they interact with the kid. So that is one of the ideas, having a virtual companion apart from a mentor.
Got it. I see what you mean. And that's a great idea. That's definitely a kind of a unique product idea. You're saying the product is going to be around kind of having this like kind of animated virtual companion that's going to be able to really kind of create that personalized relationship in a way that like gets the kid involved, right? And there's a lot of examples that these kind of things could be valuable. Look how much cartoon kids like to watch, right?
More like Dora the Explorer.
What's that?
More like Dora the Explorer.
Got it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Sounds good. So we got one idea. I think what I like about it is like it's a pretty big idea, right? You can build a whole product really optimized around this concept, right? Let's think about more ideas. S. Chan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So it just building on Layla's initial solution, which I was thinking of, which is to gamify the whole experience. And I was saying that you could go two ways with that, which is you actually have them interacting with their peers, leaderboard style, and the traditional game mechanics, and encourage that sort of habit form from a healthy sort of competitive side of things. Or you can even go the other way, which is shadier, which is having a virtual currency that that can be translated to real world rewards, which parents could partake in that as well. But I'm not so sure about whether that is something that is condoned according to like advertising standards. Or
Got it. So I think one idea of gamification, totally reasonable, right? And the kind of a bit of a comment about the virtual currency side. I would say, you have to be able to really articulate why this kind of solution would be suitable for the kids' age range, right? Because my initial reaction would be that kids are just not in that kind of like mindset, right? So if you can kind of articulate why you think this would be relevant to them, then you would definitely kind of like put the interviewer at a bit of an ease. right?
Yeah, I mean, kids will always respond to sweets, basically, and bribes. So this was, I think, the real word rewards really translates to that essentially. But it's at the parental discretion as to what those rewards actually are.
Got it, got it. So basically, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to modify, sorry, I'm laughing at Mark's comment. But if I'm understanding you right, you're kind of saying that, look, the idea is that it's a reward-based learning program that allows the parents to identify what that reward is. And you kind of, this way, you're catering to the particular interest of the kids by letting the parents to define what the rewards are, like whether that's like, watching
Yes.
cartoons or eating cookies or playing with their neighbors, right? That's kind of the idea that you're trying to get at. Is that am I kind of explaining?
Exactly. Yeah, it's
Got it.
sort of taking the whole notion of the variable rewards, but making it more discretionary and having the parents be involved in that.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that's actually a very interesting idea, right? So yeah, like I think that sounds reasonable. Sounds good. We'd love to get one more product idea. So who's interested in going next? Okay, we'll hear two because I can see Mark is very excited, but I want to go to Max first, and then I'll go to Mark. Go ahead, Mark and Max.
If someone else wants to go too, I've already spoken a bit, so I'm happy to pass up my idea to someone else.
All right, go ahead. Yeah, you can go, and then after you, like Mark will go for sure.
Okay.
But you can stay a little bit longer. Like,
To sum up the idea, just it was mentioned before with benefits, but definitely during this kind of gaming process, the person can, the kid can collect points and then exchange those points for something material or something, just to watch some cartoon or do something, so this kind of, as for master that are going to help the kid to keep up with the program, it would be really attractive and nice to keep motivating kid. Hey, like you need to focus 5 more minutes and you are going to earn the ice cream, or like you are going to earn something else. So and in addition to it, I would definitely develop the like simple roadmap for a kid, so the cartoon, this kind of master can show the whole journey. So, and all those good, show the kid all those good things during the journey. So to make sure that the kid is excited with the plan, the kids are excited with the plan, and of course they stick to every single bonus. That's kind of like just sharing the idea with master and with the points.
Got it. So thanks so much for sharing that. Now, one thing I want to also add is like kind of keep in mind, we're still kind of listing product ideas at a very, very high level, right? So you want to make sure that every product idea is like very, very distinctly separate from another one, right? So for example, the first one was very distinct, like you have a virtual character that is a kind of the part companion. The second idea was it's a gamification with rewards tied to physical, objects that are very relevant, right? So it's just like kind of something to keep in mind. But Max, why don't you go ahead and also kind of share your thoughts? I think that'd be great.
Yeah, well, the more I've heard like the different ideas and been thinking about this a little bit, I think it'd be really hard to build one product that really like solves the needs for both 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds. Because when I think of a 5-year-old, like the only real games I could imagine they would really engage with are games that like the parents would be playing with them. So I'm imagining like an interactive, almost like TV show with a preset storyline, or like there's interactions and you're answering questions together. So that's sort of what I would do if I was thinking more of like a younger kid educational tool, more like something where we're talking to the kid. We're not necessarily teaching them how to play guitar, because I just think that's kind of unrealistic. But as a 10-year-old world, I really like the idea of like a virtual avatar type thing, but I would kind of combine the two. I would almost, when I was like 10, I played this game called Neopets all the time. I was obsessed with it. And the way that game worked is you had a character that you could design, and then you could go to different parts of the world, you could interact with other people, and then you could play games to win rewards, and then you could use your rewards to customize your Neopet or level up or do things like that. And those games could be like childhood games that people are familiar with that you could almost play like with whether it's like a hardware device that's connected to something or something like that. So it's like you get a bunch of notes like Guitar Hero and you're playing Frogger, and every time you get a note right, the frog jumps to the right place, but every time you get it wrong, you jump to the wrong place, or things like that. And I would probably lean towards that solution because I think it's a much bigger market and kind of is more interesting than sort of like a tag along video that's like hand holding. But I probably would have said in this part of the interview, I need to separate the user groups because I don't think I can design a product that fits both of their needs.
Got it. That's fair. Okay. So I think that's totally fine to say that you're gonna think about a product that is kind of combining both having like potentially a companion and like really gamifying it in a way that makes sense, and like telling a story. I'm just gonna quickly add like one more product idea here and say it's gonna be around basically having like a kind of a person that's like really teaching on the other side, right? That's another idea that we don't really talk about, right? Having a teacher on the other side that's really closely teaching them, right? So I want to, because is like kind of manually engaging with them, right? Maybe like the focus is more about the human to human interaction between the two sides, and these are like highly kind of knowledgeable people that are good with kids, right? That's kind of another way of like thinking about it, right? So you can see there, like the point is like there are different ways of going about it. Yes, and another idea maybe is like some sort of an AR hardware. I mean, I think because we have limited time, I won't be able to kind of ask exactly what you mean by that, because I'm trying to think about like how that would be a product idea for kids. But for now, I'm just gonna assume that there is an idea there, and we're gonna kind of continue, right? Niraj, I know we're over time, but I want to give you a chance because you were the one that suggested one of those pain points that you wanted to highlight a good solution for. So why don't you go ahead and share your thoughts? And after that, hopefully we can stay a little bit more, spend at least 5 minutes or so to think about what we're actually going to build, right? So go ahead, Niraj.
Sure. So since it's something which we learn in real life, I mean, an instrument, having a community of, people interested in the same instrument or having similar interest would help a lot. The community will include the parents mostly. I mean, of course, kids are the participants, but ideally in the real world, it would be the parents who will be driving those communities. And under that community, I should have an option to organize events, have a forum to talk about their kids, how they are tackling different problems, and also there might be a content creation for the on those forums. So that would be an engaging platform, and it will also give chance to kids to interact with other kids with similar interests, and parents also to align themselves properly.
Got it. So I think from a product perspective, that's totally a reasonable idea. One thing I want to kind of highlight is that we decided that we're going to focus on building a product for kids, right, as the user group that we highlighted. So I think the product idea that you're suggesting is totally reasonable as a tool for parents, right? You're basically building a really strong community of parents of kids that want to learn how to play music. And the argument is that by bringing the parents together, you're bringing the kids together, and you can maybe have like kind of events, physical events, where there are like kind of more music activities related, music related activities, right? I think ideally, if you want to go down this product idea path, try to remember to position it as this is a product for kids, because you decided that that's the user group that you're going to focus on, right? That's just like the one thing that I would say. So, all right, so we've come up with a bunch of ideas. let's just say we're gonna go with an idea like the way Max highlighted it. It's going to be a kind of combination of a virtual character that is like really kind of gamifying the whole experience for you, telling the story. Let's think about what that product is going to look like. Let's think about the MVP of it, right? What are some of the things that we think on the MVP we need to include in this product? Who's interested in kind of guiding me into that step?
I'm sorry, by MVP, do you mean, does that stand for something value proposition or?
Minimum viable product, or like basically the first version of it, right? Because this is a startup, this is kind of the first thing that we're building. So what's the kind of the version 1 of the product that we're going to be building, right? What's the version 1? What needs to be in the version 1 in people's opinions? We'd love to hear at least like 5, 6 kind of key parts or key modules or key attributes of the product that we can think about.
I think one thing that we need to think about is how we categorize the kinds of music. So like, are we dividing it by instruments? Are dividing it by genre?
Got it. So, and that's a really good question. And I think the thing that kind of like immediately gets my attention is that given that there are so many different types of musical instruments, right? And we're a startup, it probably makes sense for us to just like pick one musical instrument as a start, right? So let's say for the sake of the argument, right, for the absolute version 1, we're just gonna pick one particular product, right? We're gonna pick piano, right? I just picked something very random. So let's think about, perfect, Mark also said piano, so that's great. So like we're gonna go with piano. So what is the minimum viable product, or like the version 1 for piano is gonna have? And let's think about like kind of like key features in terms of this like learning tool, right? So let's not worry about you know, things like monitoring or like account creation or billing. I'm just like interested in this product that's gonna help the kids to learn music, and it's going to teach them basically piano, right? So go ahead, S. Chan, I can see you raise your hand.
So the main goal that we're trying, or the main pain point we're trying to solve for, is a lack of interest from kids to practice. So we have to build into the system a way to track that, basically, and also a way to incentivize the children to practice. So I think it becomes key to just kind of identify when a child has stepped away from their computer, is idle, has not progressed beyond a certain chapter, say from a certain amount of time. Maybe an alert can go to their parents. Those kinds of features, really, to make sure that the child is motivated and that where they know that they're being tracked.
Got it. So I'm going to write it down for now, and I think, you know, the question, you know, if we have time to kind of do a bit of a trade-off analysis, would be, does tracking and informing parents really solve the interest problem, right? Right, because one could argue that maybe it doesn't, right? You kind of need to like figure out a way to engage the kids, right? So that's kind of something to keep in mind. I think we also need to like kind of say, now we're kind of at a point where we've decided we're going to build this product that's going to solve this problem. There are a couple of decisions that we have to make right away, right? To like narrow down on what we're going to build. For example, we could say, well, it makes sense that it's an iPad tool, right? Because it's more movable. Laptops are hard to kind of move around, and people usually have an iPad for their kids more so than a laptop. Doesn't have keys, so there's less kind of risk with like damaging it and things like that. So we're going to build an iPad app, let's say. And for this iPad app, I can think about a few things that are important, right? One is for this app to be able to listen to what the kid is playing and be able to give feedback, right? So we need to build this module, right, that is able to listen to music played by the kids and is able to give feedback. That's a pretty big, big bucket of set of product features, right? So that's kind of what I'm interested in hearing. Like, what are the big things that the 3 or 5 things that we have to think about for building this product, right? One, so I kind of listed one of them. I'm going to put a question mark right now for tracking, but one is going to be, like being able to analyze music and decide if it's good, right? And we can always later come back and say, like, look, we think that this is not necessarily going to solve the key pain point that we're trying to focus on, which is like really bringing attention. So maybe we need to kind of think a little bit more in that phase as well, right? So we'd love to hear, a few more kind of key modules ideas. Go ahead. I think Mark raised his hand first, but he did it physically. So Max, if that's okay with you, I'll go to Mark and then I'll come to you and then I'll go to Obi. Go ahead, Mark.
So some simple exercise, something really doable for kids. So like just like 1, 2, something else. So like just to switch the exercise and to show the accomplishment to a kid.
Got it. So you're saying basically one kind of key module is to build the interface for, sorry, give me 1 second, got some alarm. It's really building an interface that communicates to the user, right, to the kid, what they have to do in the physical world, right?
Yes.
That's a pretty big module, right? That's a pretty big task, and there's a lot of kind of UI UX challenges with it, right? So
but without it, I don't see how it's even possible.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why it's kind of important to think about what really needs to go into the MVP, right? Do you think that you can think a little bit even more specific and talk to what that interface could potentially look like?
Yeah, like let's say there's like person with piano keys that's showing exact keys what needs to be pressed and then as the key to repeat. And let's say if it's it's a bit more complicated, but like it listen the sound, or if it's a keyboard connected to the computer so it can track like what kind of keys were pressed. So it's much more complicated to program, but still it's more precise and more valuable tool.
Got it. So it's like kind of heavy on the visual graphics, and ideally it's in a way that really replicates what the piano looks like.
Yes.
And properly trains them. Okay,
yes.
Sounds good. So that's kind of a key module, and really like, okay, sounds good. So I want to continue. Let's hear more high-level modules that are very relevant. And just a quick reminder that we're trying to solve for lack of interest from kids in engaging, right, with kind of piano lessons, right? So go ahead, Max.
Well, yeah. So the problem was lack of interest and incentive, right, to play music. Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the sort of like value props for, or like theses for this product idea was that kids would want to practice and play because then they could customize their avatars and their characters in this world. So you need to build some sort of like basic map with characters and like this rewards marketplace and platform, which is a big undertaking. So I think that could be a module. It could be multiple modules, but if we wanted to say for the sake of this argument, I would say that could be one module and we could define how big or small we want to make that. Maybe to start, it's like one small map with like 5 different locations with 5 different games or lessons. In each game, you can get points, and then you can only get, maybe like different skins or things like that. You make 5 to 10. We could start there, and you could always add on later.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks so much for highlighting that. And I think it's really interesting how you really thought about, okay, we need to, in order for us to really have this kind of gamification system for kids that keeps them engaged, we got to build this reward mechanism. And we can decide how customized it's going to be, maybe not so much at the beginning, more so later. But you need to have some kind of basic elements of it to be able to deliver on that gamification. So that's totally reasonable. All right, we'd love to hear one more idea, maybe from Obi. Go ahead.
Okay, I mean, I was thinking of a few. I think one, we need like a way to schedule practice time, make sure that it's more like routine. That way they're more likely to come back. Two, we need to build an infrastructure for a leaderboard, maybe. If there's a point system, there needs to be a leaderboard so kids can see like kind of track their movement. Competition is a big motivator. A voice assistant, like that's just speaking to them. Kids a lot of the time need to be spoken to and like won't just like read what's on the screen. And then like you were saying, like unlocking new parts of a map, but like what if they just like unlock new songs? Like what if they wanted a specific song and the only way to get to that song was to learn kind of the ones before it. And then also lastly, I would say one module is customization. Like the parent knows their kids the best. We need to create some way for parents to customize the journey for their kid.
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks so much for that. And, I think these are all like, I tried to write, a couple of them. So one was the leaderboard. I think another one was a kind of customization. I think that almost is part of the reward system, but I can also see it being separate. But as we can see, there's a kind of this, we can kind of spend a lot of time really thinking about all these different modules, right? But given that we have limited time, I'm going to kind of like move on to the next phase and assume that we came up with like kind of 5 to 10. And then what do we need to do next? Like what's the kind of last 1 or 2 steps that we have to take? I would love to hear somebody quickly describing and hopefully we can wrap it up in a couple of minutes. Go ahead. Maybe Obi, would you be interested in kind of sharing what you would do next?
Sure. I mean, I think what's next is just prioritize the feature we want to go after using like some kind of matrix, like the reward opportunity versus the difficulty or complexity. And then once we pick a feature, explain that how that fits into the big picture, go over like our start to finish, and yeah, we're done. So I think to start with the features, prioritization, I mean, we would have to kind of go through each and say like what the reward is, what the...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the tricky part is like, because we have limited time, right? I think and you're totally right, that would be the next step, right? Ideally, you try to kind of like, manage the time and say, okay, out of these ideas, given we have limited time, I'm going to focus on 2, 3, 4, for example, right? Because I can't see us being able to deliver on this idea without these 3. And if we build a product with these 3, we can even give it away for free, right? And then see if it sticks, if like, the users are interested in interacting with it. So that's really going to help us really learn and like get a good understanding, right? So if you wanted to think about it that way, I'm curious to know, like, is it fair to say that maybe, the couple of things that are really important is like maybe the tool that kind of tells the kid like what they have to press and everything, and also like the reward system maybe for like showing the milestones and all that, right? Like I feel like without these 2, we're not really able to get this product properly tested as an MVP, right? And I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping into a little bit of like giving an answer. And like being able to analyze music and decide it's good. That's a good point. Should that be as part of an MVP? And this is where, you can debate, right? Because one side could say, you can actually fake that for an MVP, right? And just see if you can get pure feedback through user testing sessions. Or one might say, no, it's absolutely essential because I want to release this on the App Store and actually have people interact with it, right? If it's the latter, then yes, I think feature 2 is absolutely necessary, right? So thank you so much for attending today's session. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. My apologies for it going a little bit long. I love this stuff, so sometimes I go over the time, and I hope to see you guys again on Thursday. I'll be around on Thursday again. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.